I never thought the sound of a child's laughter could break me. That day, it did. It was a Saturday. Blue sky, sunshine, the kind of morning that used to mean peace. My son, Evan, was finally feeling brave enough to join the other kids at the neighborhood playground. His wheelchair glinted in the light as he rolled toward the swings, his hands trembling, but his smile wide. Then she appeared. The HOA president. "Excuse me," she snapped, voice sharp as glass. "This playground isn't for those kinds of kids." The laughter stopped. Even the birds seemed to go quiet. Evan's smile faltered. His fingers froze on the wheels. I remember the way his eyes darted toward me, confusion melting into fear. And me, a federal judge who'd sentenced criminals, faced killers, stood there speechless. Because, for the first time in years, I didn't know what justice looked like. People see the robe, the courtroom, the headlines. They think justice is easy when you're the one handing it out. But justice is only simple until it touches your home. My name is Daniel Ross, federal judge for the Western District of Virginia. But to my son, I'm just Dad. Evan was born 8 weeks early. He spent the first 6 months of his life in a hospital crib surrounded by machines that beeped louder than my heartbeat. The doctors told us he might never walk, maybe never speak. But Evan defied every line of his prognosis. He learned to communicate with a tablet. He laughed like sunlight, and he lived every small victory as if it were a miracle. My wife, Claire, and I moved into Hawthorne Meadows 3 years ago. A gated community with picture-perfect lawns, identical mailboxes, and an HOA that prided itself on maintaining neighborhood standards. Back then, it felt safe, clean, predictable. Exactly what we needed after years of hospitals and surgeries. Our house had a ramp leading up to the front porch, one the HOA insisted we make aesthetic adjustments to, which really meant painting it beige to match the fences. I didn't argue. I was tired. I just wanted peace for Evan. He loved that playground. Every morning he'd look out the window and point toward it, his fingers tapping the glass in rhythm. The swing set was his Everest, and every day he told me, "Soon, Dad." I'd smile, ruffle his hair, and promise him he could take all the time he needed. But I didn't realize that time, our time, was already running out. One evening, during a neighborhood barbecue, I overheard the HOA president, Karen Whitmore, talking to a group of residents near the pool. She was in her late 50s, always dressed like she was headed to a board meeting. Pearls, pressed blazer, clipboard under her arm like it was an extension of her spine. She laughed that night, sipping white wine. "We're getting too many exceptions around here," she said. "Ramps, special parking signs, now that swing set request. It's ruining the aesthetic." The group nodded, some uncomfortably, some eagerly. I should have said something. I should have walked over, introduced myself, your federal judge neighbor, who also happens to be the father of that exception you're mocking. But I didn't. I told myself it was better to stay out of it. I'd seen too many petty disputes spiral into chaos. I thought silence was maturity. I didn't yet know that silence can also be cowardice. The morning of the incident started perfectly. Evan had just finished therapy. Claire was baking muffins. I was catching up on case files on the porch when Evan rolled out, pointing toward the park again. "Today?" he asked with those hopeful eyes. I smiled. "Yeah, buddy." Today, I didn't bring my badge. I didn't bring my title. Just sunscreen, a bottle of water, and a father's pride. He rolled up to the sandbox first. Some of the kids waved. They knew him from the school bus. One of them, little Lucy from down the street, offered him a red plastic shovel. For a moment, the world was right. Then Karen arrived, clipboard in hand. Her shadow fell over the sandbox like a storm. "Excuse me," she said again, like she owned the air itself. This area isn't accessible compliant for wheelchairs. Liability risk. You'll need to remove your child immediately. Claire froze. I looked up, confused. What do you mean, remove? I asked. Rules are rules, she said. It's not safe. He could get hurt, or worse, hurt someone else. Those words, someone else, still echo like a gavel in my skull. That was the day everything started to crack. I remember the silence that followed her words. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that hums in your ears because no one knows what to say. Claire stood up first. You're telling my son he can't play because he's in a wheelchair? Karen crossed her arms, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. It's not personal. It's policy. Section 3.4 of the HOA Safety Code. I'd read those bylaws. Every line, every clause. Nothing, absolutely nothing, mentioned playground accessibility. But I didn't argue. Not yet. Evan looked between us, his tablet in his lap. He typed a single word. Home? And my heart shattered. Claire's eyes welled up. No, sweetheart. You're fine. You can stay. But Karen stepped closer, lowering her voice like a threat. Ma'am, if you don't comply, we'll have to file a community conduct violation. I could have you fined. I finally stood, slowly, calmly, the way I did in court when I was about to deliver a ruling. Karen, I said, I don't think you understand who you're speaking to. She squinted at me, unamused. Oh, I know exactly who you are. The new family. The one with the ramp. Her tone twisted that last word, ramp, like it was a slur. I wanted to believe it was ignorance. I wanted to believe she didn't mean harm. But then she said, we have a certain image to maintain here, judge or not. We can't have the place looking like a hospital. That was the first time she called me judge. Not out of respect, out of warning. That evening, we received our first HOA violation notice. Unauthorized structural modification to front property. Ramp does not conform to approved color palette. Claire read it aloud, her hands trembling. They're coming after us? I exhaled slowly, trying to sound steady. It's intimidation. They'll back off when they realize they're crossing a line, but she didn't look convinced. Over the next week, we noticed things. Subtle things. Trash cans left tipped over in front of our driveway. A note taped to our mailbox. Equal rules for everyone. And the worst of it. Evan's therapy ball, the one he used every morning on the porch, popped with a knife slit. I didn't need evidence to know who did it. I'd spent my career studying human behavior, and everything about Karen screamed control. Still, I stayed silent. Told myself not to make enemies in my own neighborhood. Told myself justice would come quietly. It didn't. One afternoon, while I was at court, Claire called me, voice shaking. Daniel, she's here again. Karen. She's taking photos of the ramp. Of Evan. I felt the blood rush from my head. What? She said she's documenting violations. She told Evan he couldn't sit in the common area anymore. Said his wheelchair damages the grass. Daniel, she scared him. My knuckles went white around my phone. I could hear my clerk in the hallway outside, waiting for me to reconvene the trial. But all I could think of was my son's face that morning, his joy, his laughter, and that woman's shadow looming over him. I whispered, I'm coming home. When I pulled into the driveway, Karen was there, clipboard out, camera phone raised. Click, click. Taking pictures like she was gathering evidence for war. Karen! I called out. My voice echoed across the cul-de-sac. She turned, startled but smug. Judge Ross? Perfect timing. I'm documenting property code violations for the board meeting. I walk toward her, each step deliberate. You're harassing my family. Her smile didn't fade. I'm ensuring compliance. With what law? I demanded. With community expectations, she replied, her tone sugar-coated poison. Your family seems different. And sometimes different creates tension. I'm just trying to maintain harmony. That word still makes my stomach turn. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice. You're discriminating against a disabled child. You realize that's a federal offense, don't you? Her smirk faltered for a second, just a flicker, but she recovered. You wouldn't dare bring federal matters into a neighborhood issue. I took a breath. You'd be surprised what I dare, Mrs. Whitmore. That night, the board held a special session. We weren't invited, but someone slipped a note under our door. Agenda item: accessibility concerns regarding playground use. The next morning, a fresh sign was posted at the park gate. Playground closed. Safety renovations in progress. Except there were no renovations, no workers, no construction tape, just silence and locked gates. Evan sat by the window for hours, staring at that sign. His tablet blinked a single word. Why? I didn't know how to answer. The following days blurred together. Letters, whispers, stares. Neighbors who once waved now crossed the street. Claire stopped baking. Evan stopped smiling. And every time I thought it couldn't get worse, another notice appeared. Noise complaint, wheelchair on pavement at 7:13 a.m. Unauthorized outdoor medical equipment. Violation, non-uniform yard decor, therapy ramp color. Each one printed, dated, signed by Karen Whitmore. That's when I realized this wasn't about aesthetics. It was about power. She wasn't just protecting her HOA rules, she was protecting her control. And she'd chosen the wrong family to intimidate. Because if she wanted a fight, she was about to get one. The days blurred into one long argument. Letters from the HOA stacked like subpoenas on our kitchen counter. Each one colder, crueler, more absurd. I'd hold them up under the kitchen light, reading the words I'd read 100 times in courtrooms: violation, hearing, penalty. But this time, they weren't aimed at a stranger. They were aimed at my son. One Tuesday evening, a formal notice appeared in our mailbox. Mandatory board hearing. Subject: revocation of common area access for Evan Ross. Claire read it twice before the meaning sank in. They're banning him from the playground? I nodded, jaw tight. They can't. That's illegal. She looked at me, eyes red. Then stop it, Daniel. You're a judge. Stop it. That sentence tore through me, because for the first time in my career, I didn't know how. Federal law couldn't just appear in a neighborhood dispute, not until someone broke it, and they were dancing right on that line. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of coffee and disinfectant thick in the air. Karen sat at the center table, pearls gleaming, gavel resting beside her like she'd earned it. When we entered, whispers spread. That's them. The judge's family. Why bring the kid if he can't play anyway? I pushed Evan's chair to the front. His fingers tapped nervously on the tablet screen, spelling, "Okay?" I forced a smile. "Always." Karen cleared her throat. "This meeting will come to order." She listed violations in a voice that dripped with false civility. Ramp color, unauthorized modifications, safety concerns. Then she paused, as if savoring dessert. "Finally," she said, "the playground matter. We've received multiple complaints that the presence of specialized equipment creates discomfort for other children." My blood froze. Claire whispered, "Discomfort?" I leaned forward. "Madam President, are you referring to my son's wheelchair?" Karen smiled sweetly. "I'm referring to the overall situation." I stood. "You're discriminating against a disabled child. Under the Fair Housing Act, that's—" She slammed her tiny wooden gavel. "Out of order, Mr. Ross. This is a private community proceeding private, like their conscience. The vote was held by raised hands. 5 members. 3 went up. Motion carried. Evan was banned from the playground. That night, rain hammered the roof like judgment. Evan cried himself to sleep, clutching his toy dump truck, the one he used to take to the park every Saturday. I sat in the dark living room, laptop open, pulling up federal disability statutes. I wasn't just a judge anymore. I was a father building a case. By midnight, I had a file. By 3 a.m., I had a plan. The next morning, I filed a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development. It was the first time I'd ever used my legal training for personal revenge. It felt wrong and right. 2 days later, our mailbox was smashed. Evan's ramp was splattered with paint, bright HOA approved beige. A note stuck to the door read, "If you don't like it here, leave." Claire wanted to call the police. I told her to wait, not because I didn't care, but because I wanted Karen to show her hand. She did. A week later, I came home to find a city inspector on our lawn. "Anonymous complaint," he said, flipping through his clipboard. "Something about unsafe construction on the ramp?" I laughed, the sound more like a growl. Karen watched from across the street, arms folded, smile small and satisfied. That was the moment something in me cracked. At night, I started recording everything. Dates, times, photos, emails. Each entry read like evidence in a trial that hadn't been scheduled yet. Claire worried I was losing myself in it. "You're not fighting her anymore," she said softly. "You're becoming her." Maybe she was right, because part of me didn't just want justice anymore. I wanted her humiliated. It happened on an ordinary Saturday morning, the kind that used to mean pancakes and cartoons. Evan wanted to go outside. The playground was still locked, but he liked to watch the trees from the sidewalk. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard it, a crash, followed by a scream. I ran out the door barefoot. Evan's wheelchair was tipped over at the curb. He was on the ground, crying, one arm twisted awkwardly beneath him. A neighbor stood nearby, pale. I saw her car. She didn't stop. Karen's white Lexus disappeared around the corner. For one frozen heartbeat, everything in me went silent. The judge, the calm, the law. All that was left was a father kneeling on wet pavement holding his son. Claire ran out, sobbing, "Evan! Oh my God, call 911. At the hospital, the diagnosis came fast. Fractured wrist, bruised ribs, no internal bleeding. He would heal physically. But the way he stared at the ceiling, not speaking, told me something else had broken. When the officer came to take our statement, I expected hesitation. Instead, he sighed. "We've had other complaints about that woman. But proving intent, it's tough. Intent. That word burned. Because I'd built my entire career on proving it. That night, after Evan finally fell asleep, I sat on the porch. The ramp, streaked with beige paint, glowed under the porch light like a scar. Claire joined me, silent. After a while, she said, "You can't fix this as a judge." "I know," I whispered, "but I can't expose it." She touched my hand. "Then do it." Not for us. For him. And that was it. The moment the case left my heart and entered my hands. I spent the next month compiling everything. The violation letters, emails, witness statements, even the meeting transcript a sympathetic neighbor had secretly recorded on her phone. Every sound bite was poison wrapped in politeness. We must protect the aesthetic integrity of our neighborhood. Children with special needs require different accommodations. It's unfortunate, but rules are rules. Each phrase dripped with discrimination disguised as bureaucracy. I filed a federal civil rights lawsuit. Ross versus Hawthorne Meadows Homeowners Association. Karen must have gotten the news within hours, because by evening, her husband was pounding on my door, red-faced and furious. "You think you can ruin us with your fancy court tricks?" he shouted. "You'll destroy this neighborhood." I met his eyes. Then, maybe it deserves to be destroyed. He didn't have an answer. The local news picked up the story. Federal judge sues HOA over disabled child discrimination. Within days, cameras lined the street. Reporters called our phones nonstop. Karen tried to spin it, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she'd been misquoted. But the footage from the meeting told another story. Her words, her voice, her gavel. Neighbors began choosing sides. Some left casseroles on our porch. Others left notes that said, "Shame on you for bringing politics into this." I stopped reading them, because I'd already chosen my side. One afternoon, as I was driving back from court, I saw Karen standing at the locked playground gate arguing with two men in suits. They were HUD investigators. I parked, rolled down my window, and listened. Karen's voice cracked with desperation. "I was just following the bylaws." One agent replied calmly, "Ma'am, discrimination doesn't hide behind bylaws." For the first time, she looked small, and I felt something I hadn't in months. Hope. But hope is never the end of the story. It's the calm before the next verdict. A week before the hearing, I received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a photo of me and Evan at the park, and a note, "Judges shouldn't throw stones when they live in glass houses." Attached was a printout of one of my old rulings, a case where I'd dismissed a disability discrimination claim on procedural grounds. My own words now twisted into a weapon. I sat in my office, staring at that line. Had I ever been her, blind to real pain behind technicalities? The thought hollowed me out. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Evan's voice, small and tired. "Home?" And I realized this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability, for all of us. The next morning, I packed my robe into a garment bag. Not as armor, as confession. Because when I walked into that courtroom again, I wouldn't just be a judge. I'd be a father demanding justice from the same system I'd once served. And for the first time in my career, I was ready to fight like someone who had nothing left to lose. The courtroom felt colder than any I'd ever presided over. It wasn't my bench this time. It was my turn to sit on the other side. Claire squeezed my hand as the bailiff called the session to order. Case number 23, CV482, Ross versus Hawthorne Meadows Homeowners Association. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd heard that tone 1,000 times, but never with my own name attached. Across the aisle, Karen sat at the defendant's table. Perfectly pressed suit, pearls gleaming like armor. But her eyes flicked nervously toward the cameras lining the back row. Her power didn't fit as comfortably here. The judge, an old colleague named Marianne Blake, looked at me with quiet understanding. "Mr. Ross," she said carefully, "you understand you'll be treated as any other plaintiff in this courtroom." I nodded. "That's all I've ever wanted, Your Honor." Our attorney, a soft-spoken disability rights lawyer named David Ramirez, began with calm precision. "This is not a case about property aesthetics," he said, pacing slowly. "It's a case about dignity. About a child told he doesn't belong because of his wheelchair." He gestured toward Evan sitting beside Claire in the front row. His small hand clutched his toy dump truck, the same one from that awful day. He didn't speak, but his silence said everything. Karen's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man in a navy suit, countered with rehearsed confidence. "The HOA acted under community safety concerns, not prejudice. The plaintiff is using his federal position to intimidate." "Objection," Ramirez cut in. Judge Blake raised a brow. "Sustained." Watch your insinuations. Counsel. Karen looked down, cheeks flushed. For the first time, she didn't look superior. She looked cornered. We played the audio from the HOA meeting, the one our neighbor had secretly recorded. Karen's voice filled the room. We can't have the place looking like a hospital. It ruins the aesthetic. Rules are rules. Some kids just don't fit the environment. Each word echoed like a hammer strike. Across the aisle, Karen's lawyer paled. Her lips tightened. She didn't deny it. She couldn't. When the recording ended, the silence was deafening. Even the court reporter looked up, eyes wide. Judge Blake leaned forward. Mrs. Whitmore, is that your voice? Karen hesitated. It sounds like me, yes, but... No further questions, Ramirez said softly. Then came the moment I'd dreaded, when I took the stand. I'd spent my career asking questions, not answering them. But when Ramirez asked, "Why did you bring this case, Mr. Ross?" I didn't speak as a judge, I spoke as a father. Because my son deserves the same joy every child in that neighborhood takes for granted. Because no law, no rule, no aesthetic should ever silence a child's laughter. My voice broke. I tried to hide it, but I saw the jurors, heads tilted, eyes glassy. Ramirez nodded gently. And when you filed this suit, were you seeking personal gain? I shook my head. I was seeking accountability. For her, and maybe for myself. For every time I let paperwork bury pain I didn't understand. The courtroom went still. Even Karen's lawyer didn't move. During Karen's testimony, the mask finally slipped. She started calm, polished. But the more Ramirez pressed, the more her voice cracked. You called his wheelchair a liability, he said. Why? Because it's dangerous. The ramp, the swings, all of it, she snapped. If something happened to him, we'd be blamed. So, your solution was to exclude him? It's not exclusion, she shouted, her composure crumbling. It's maintaining order. Ramirez paused. Order or control? Karen's breathing quickened. She looked around, realizing how small her argument sounded out loud. The judge's voice cut through the silence. You may step down, Mrs. Whitmore. For the first time, I saw her as what she really was. Not a villain, not a monster. Just a person terrified of losing control. 3 hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom lights buzzed faintly as the foreperson stood. We find in favor of the plaintiff, Daniel Ross, on all counts. Damages awarded, $450,000 plus mandatory community accessibility compliance. Claire gasped softly. I didn't move. For a moment, I couldn't. The words felt heavy, not victory, not revenge, just gravity. Karen stared at the table, tears sliding silently down her face. I thought I'd feel satisfaction. Instead, I just felt tired. Judge Blake's voice echoed softly, Justice is served. But even as the gavel fell, I knew justice doesn't always mean peace. The collapse. After victory, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Flashbulbs, microphones, the metallic taste of adrenaline. Judge Ross, any comment? Is this a message to other HOAs? Do you regret taking legal action personally? I didn't answer. I just looked down at Evan beside me. He squinted against the flashes, fingers gripping my sleeve. That night, back home, I found him asleep with his dump truck on his chest, the same toy that had rolled through so much pain. For the first time in months, his breathing was steady, peaceful. I sat beside him and whispered, You did it, buddy. You reminded them what justice looks like. He stirred, half asleep, murmuring, Play again. And that's when I broke. I walked outside into the cool night air. The playground gate still stood locked under the lamplight, the same gate that had started all of this. I rested my hand on the cold metal and whispered, Never again. Because in that moment I realized justice wasn't the verdict. It was the promise that no one else's child would ever be made to feel less human. Justice had been served. But peace was something different. The headlines faded in a week. The cameras moved on to another story, another outrage. But for us, Hawthorne Meadows stayed the same, at least on the surface. The lawns were still green, the mailboxes still uniform, and the playground gate still locked for months. At first, no one spoke to us. Neighbors who used to wave crossed the street now. Some muttered that we'd destroyed property values. Others left their HOA memberships quietly, as if stepping away from a cult. And then, one morning, I woke to find a folded note under our doormat. It wasn't a threat this time. It read, "I'm sorry. I voted yes that night. I was wrong. No name. No signature. Just words." I sat on the porch steps for a long time holding that note, thinking about how easy it is for good people to stay silent, and how silence turns to complicity. 2 months later, the Department of Justice announced an audit into HOA discrimination practices statewide. It wasn't just about us anymore. Our case had become a precedent, Ross versus Hawthorne, cited in 3 new accessibility suits before the year's end. Karen Whitmore was removed from the HOA board. The community voted her out quietly without ceremony. I heard she sold her house and moved to Florida soon after. One evening, I saw the moving truck outside her home. She caught my eye across the cul-de-sac, the first time we'd seen each other since court. Her face looked older, fragile. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then she nodded, barely perceptible, a gesture halfway between apology and surrender. I nodded back. No words were exchanged. Some verdicts don't need them. Months later, a construction crew arrived at the playground. Real one this time. City-funded, supervised by accessibility experts. By spring, the gates reopened. New ramps, adaptive swings, and a bright blue sign that read, "Inclusive Playground. Every child welcome." When Evan saw it, he froze. Then his face broke into the kind of smile that makes time stop. Claire and I rolled him through the new gate together. The other kids were already there, laughing, running, waiting. Lucy, the little girl who'd offered him a shovel months ago, waved. "Evan, come swing with us." He hesitated, then looked up at me, eyes wide, the same question as always, "Okay?" This time, I didn't answer. I just gave him a gentle push toward the swing. The wind caught him as the seat lifted. He laughed, that sound I hadn't heard in months, pure, unfiltered joy, and I cried, not quietly, not stoically, just finally. Because in that laughter, everything was forgiven. The HOA held a new election that summer. I was asked to run for president. I declined. Instead, I nominated a young mother named Dana, whose son was autistic and who'd once been told her backyard therapy tent was an eyesore. She won by a landslide. Her first act as president was to create a new rule book, simple, clear, and humane. No more hidden clauses, no more aesthetic over access. She renamed it the Community Charter for Inclusion. When she handed me the first printed copy, she said, "You started this, Judge Ross. We're just making sure it lasts." I smiled. Then it was worth it. That night, after the meeting, I went into my study. On the wall hung 2 photographs side by side, one from my judicial appointment, me in the black robe, smiling with nervous pride, and one of Evan at the new playground, head tilted back mid-laugh, sunlight catching the edges of his wheelchair. For years, I'd thought justice lived in the courtroom, in rulings and verdicts, in polished words on paper. But justice isn't a place. It's a choice we make when no one's watching. I took off the robe that night and folded it into a box, not out of shame, out of understanding, because I'd learned that authority doesn't define justice. Compassion does. 2 weeks later, another envelope arrived. No return address. Inside was a short letter in looping cursive. Judge Ross, I thought I was protecting order. I see now I was protecting fear. I'm truly sorry. Karen W. I sat there for a long while, reading those words again and again. Part of me wanted to throw the letter away. Another part wanted to believe her. I placed it beside Evan's first therapy report, the one that said he'd never move independently. Both were proof of something beautiful, that people can be wrong and still change. Weeks turned to months. The ramp outside our house weathered, its paint chipping slightly. I never repainted it. Some scars should stay visible. Evan grew stronger. He started tutoring other kids in his class on his communication tablet. One day, his teacher called to tell us he'd won an essay contest. The topic? What does fairness mean to you? He'd written one line, just one. Fairness is when my dad doesn't have to be a judge to make people listen. I had to leave the room when I read it. Claire found me outside, eyes wet, laughing through tears. Guess he inherited your way with words, she said. Maybe, I whispered, but he uses them better. The following spring, we held a community picnic at the new playground. Kids of every kind, walkers, wheelchairs, braces, noise-canceling headphones, all playing together. No one stared, no one whispered. The air was different, not perfect, but better. As I watched Evan push himself toward the slide, Karen's words came back, the cruel ones, the ignorant ones, and I realized something I hadn't before. If she hadn't said them, I might never have fought. If she hadn't tried to take something from him, I might never have learned what justice costs, or what it's worth. Later that night, I tucked Evan into bed. He was drowsy, half asleep. "Dad?" he murmured. "Yeah, buddy? Are we safe now?" I hesitated, then kissed his forehead. "Yeah," I said softly. "We're home." He smiled. "Good. Can we go to the park tomorrow?" I smiled back, tears in my throat. You never even have to ask. I used to think justice was loud, that it came with gavels and verdicts and applause from the gallery. But justice, I've learned, is often quiet. It's the sound of a child's laughter returning after months of silence. It's the whisper of a community finally learning how to listen. That summer, Hawthorne Meadows changed. The neighborhood that once prided itself on perfection began to breathe again. Lawns weren't quite as identical. Mailboxes were painted different shades of color, and for the first time, no one complained. Because sameness had finally stopped being the goal. Evan became something of a local hero. The story spread, the judge, and the playground. Reporters moved on, but the lesson stayed. A local law school invited me to speak about the case. I walked into a lecture hall filled with students, bright-eyed, idealistic. One young woman raised her hand and asked, "Your Honor, what was the hardest part about fighting for justice?" I smiled faintly, remembering that justice and revenge don't look the same. After the lawsuit, I took a 6-month leave from the bench, not because I had to, but because I needed to. For years, I'd spent my days interpreting law, not living under it, and that experience, it humbled me. Every morning, I'd sit on the porch with my coffee while Evan played with his therapy dog, Scout, on the lawn. He'd point at the sky, naming clouds in his tablet's synthetic voice. To anyone else, it was just a boy talking about weather. To me, it was proof that healing isn't found in silence. It's found in sound, the kind we take for granted. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Karen Whitmore's daughter. She spoke softly, nervous. "Judge Ross, I just wanted you to know. My mother's been volunteering at a disability resource center down here in Sarasota. She talks about your son a lot." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. She continued. She said she never knew what she didn't know. She said your son taught her that. After we hung up, I sat for a long time at my desk staring at the framed photo of Evan in his swing. I whispered, "Looks like you changed more than one life, buddy." When I returned to the bench, things felt different. Every case that came across my docket, especially those about discrimination or access, hit differently now. They weren't just words in a file. They were people, families, stories. One case in particular stayed with me. A young veteran denied housing because of his service dog. When the lawyers finished their arguments, I paused longer than usual before giving my ruling. And I said, law isn't just a system. It's a promise that fairness isn't something you earn, but something you're owed. That line made it into the papers the next morning. I didn't care about the quote. I cared about the man's face when he heard it. Months later, a local artist approached me. She wanted to build a small memorial near the playground, not for tragedy, but for change. She called it the swing that started it. It was simple. A bronze swing seat suspended between two metal posts, engraved with Evan's name and a single quote from the trial transcript. Every child deserves the right to joy. When it was unveiled, the entire neighborhood showed up. Some cried, some smiled through it. Karen wasn't there, but in a way she was. Because forgiveness doesn't always require presence. Sometimes it's just permission to let go. That night, after the ceremony, Evan asked if he could stay at the park a little longer. He wanted to swing one more time before sunset. So I stood behind him, pushing gently, the orange light spilling over the trees. His laughter mixed with the creak of the chains and the chirp of crickets waking up. After a while, he turned his head slightly and said, "Dad?" "Yeah, buddy?" "Are you still mad at her?" The question hit me harder than any verdict. I thought about everything, the pain, the rage, the endless nights building a case just to prove my son's humanity. And then I looked at him, whole, happy, weightless in the air, and I realized the truth. "No," I said softly, "not anymore." He nodded, thoughtful, as if filing the answer away somewhere safe. Then he smiled. "Good." Me neither. A year passed. The ramp outside our home still stood, faded but strong. The playground never closed again. And every spring the HOA hosted a community day for children with disabilities, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Evan grew taller, stronger. He could move his chair faster than ever now. Sometimes when I saw him racing down the path, wind in his hair, I'd think, this is what freedom looks like. One afternoon, he asked me to help him record something on his tablet for a school project. He titled it, "My Favorite Place." His voice, robotic but steady, played back the words. My favorite place isn't a park. It's anywhere people decide to be kind. I still keep the letter from Karen. Not as a reminder of pain, but of progress. It sits in the same drawer as my gavel. Both symbols of accountability, but only one of them brings peace. When people ask me now what it means to be a judge, I tell them this. It means listening to the stories behind the evidence, because justice doesn't live in law books. It lives in what we choose to see. Sometimes, late at night, I walk past Evan's room and hear him dreaming, soft murmurs, gentle breaths. And I remember the day that laughter was taken from him and the day it returned. That's the rhythm of life, I suppose. Loss and restoration, darkness and dawn. I look out at the playground lights twinkling through the window, and I whisper a small prayer, not for punishment, not for victory, but for empathy, because that's where all justice begins. I pause, taking one last look at the swing set outside, the same one that started it all. And I say the words that finally feel true. Justice isn't about winning. It's about remembering why we fight in the first place.